The sun scorched the dry earth of Ouagadougou like a cruel reminder that hardship never took a day off. The heat didn't just burn, it revealed. It peeled away comfort, pretense, and arrogance. It made you see who people really were. That morning, the city's crowded market was pulsing with life, merchants hollering their prices, goats bleating as they weaved through legs, children darting past vendors with mischief in their eyes. And amidst it all, walked a man in dusty combat boots and a weather-worn jacket. No one knew his name. No one noticed his calm posture, the way his sharp eyes observed everything without judgment, or how he helped a struggling vendor lift a crate without a word. To the crowd, he was just another soldier. A nobody. That's when the trouble began. He walked into a small roadside cafe, the kind that served hot tea and even hotter opinions. The place was full, men loudly debating politics they half understood, old women complaining about how youth no longer respected elders, and a few off-duty security officers puffing on cigarettes with more pride than pay. The man sat quietly in the corner, ordered tea, and listened. It wasn't long before the conversation turned to Ibrahim Tarore, the president of Burkina Faso, the man who had seized power in the middle of a political storm. "Traore is just another uniform," one of the men barked, waving his cigarette. "Young fool playing at being a leader." Another laughed. "He's too young, too soft. This country needs iron, not hope." The man in the corner said nothing, his tea untouched. He simply watched, his gaze not angry, just heavy, like the silence before a storm. Minutes passed before the man finally spoke, his voice calm, measured. "What has Ibrahim Traore done that offends you so deeply?" The cafe stilled. The air thickened. One of the off-duty guards turned in his seat. "You got a problem, soldier?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Or are you one of those Traore bootlickers?" Another chimed in, his just a low-rank grunt. "Probably here to eavesdrop. Who let you sit here?" Then came the insult that no one would forget. One man, reeking of beer and bitterness, stood up and pointed a trembling finger. "Get out," he sneered. "We don't want the likes of you defending that coward here." And with that, he shoved the man. The room froze. The stranger didn't retaliate. He just looked at the hand that had pushed him, his expression unreadable. He stood slowly. For a moment, the room thought they were about to witness a fight. But instead, the man simply placed a few coins on the table for the tea he didn't drink and turned to leave. The cafe erupted into laughter. "Coward!" one shouted. "Run back to your master," another added. But none of them noticed the elderly man at the back of the cafe rise to his feet, his eyes wide in horror. "Do you fools know what you've just done?" he whispered. No one heard him outside. The man walked quietly, not hurried, not angry. He disappeared into the dusty crowd, a ghost wrapped in humility. What they didn't know, what none of them had taken a moment to realize, was that the man they had insulted, mocked, and pushed was President Ibrahim Traore himself. Back at the presidential palace, a convoy waited. The guard stood straighter as the young leader returned, still in his dusty jacket, still with quiet eyes. One of his advisors rushed up, concern written all over his face. "Sir, your security detail." Traore held up a hand. "Let them speak freely," he said softly. "Let them hate me without fear. That is what it means to serve." And then he entered the palace, not with fanfare or fury, but with purpose. Weeks passed. The sun still beat down mercilessly on the red earth of Burkina Faso, and the problems of a wounded nation did not disappear because one man walked humbly among them. But something intangible had changed. Hope, once buried under layers of corruption, despair, and broken promises, had begun to resurface in whispers, in children's eyes, in the quiet actions of ordinary people. All because of one man who chose not to be seen as a ruler, but as a servant. Ibrahim Traore didn't speak of that day at the cafe. Not to his ministers. Not to his advisors. Not even in his late-night writings that never left the desk drawer in his study. But it lingered in him. He carried it, not like a wound, but like a compass. Every insult, every misjudgment from that moment reminded him of the work left undone, the voices still unheard, the citizens still unseen. That was the burden of real leadership, to understand that being right meant nothing if the people you served couldn't feel it in their bones. One evening, after visiting a burned-down school in the north, where rebel gunfire had silenced a generation's chance to read, he sat with a young boy who had lost both parents. The boy didn't cry. He simply stared at the cracked earth and asked, "Do you think someone will save us?" Tarore, exhausted, dirt on his face, blood on his boots from treating the injured, looked at him and answered softly, "We save each other. That's how we survive." He knew, then, that no speech on national television could plant that truth deeper than his own hands could by lifting bricks to rebuild that school. So he stayed there for days, hammered nails, carried supplies, sat in silence with grieving mothers. And slowly, villagers started arriving, not because they were told to, but because they saw something in him that mirrored who they wanted to become. But far away, in capital halls built from marble and inherited ego, whispers grew louder. Western powers and regional elites, those who saw Burkina Faso as a pawn rather than a nation, began to worry. He's too independent. He's waking the people up. This kind of leader doesn't last long. Tarore heard it all. He read the briefings, saw the threats veiled in diplomacy. He knew what happened to African leaders who dared to walk unarmed among their people. His own staff begged him to travel with tighter security. "Sir, please, the risk is too high," they'd say. One day, after a credible threat came in from a well-known rebel faction, they pleaded again. But his answer never changed. "If I die walking among my people, then I died doing what a president should do, not hiding behind walls." Then came the turning point. A protest erupted, this time, not against him, but for him. Thousands took to the streets, waving signs not with slogans but with truths. "He walks where we cry. He listens. He is one of us." It wasn't orchestrated by political operatives. It was born in villages, nurtured in classrooms, whispered by elders, and shouted by youth. Something no regime could manufacture: genuine love. The kind earned by blood, sweat, and humility. International news outlets, once dismissive of Tarore as another young revolutionary, began to change their tone. "Africa's quiet storm," one headline read. "The soldier president who refused the palace," said another. But Tarore didn't smile at any of it. His mission was not recognition. It was redemption, for his country, for every fatherless child, every widow of war, every community abandoned by those in suits and silence. Then, without warning, tragedy struck. A convoy headed to deliver medicine in a remote region was ambushed. It wasn't supposed to be high risk. Intelligence had cleared the route. But someone knew. Someone had leaked. Among the wreckage, twisted metal, burned tires, and blooded uniforms, was the unmistakable coat Ibrahim Tarore had always worn, folded neatly beside a child he had shielded with his own body. He had been in the convoy, not directing it from afar, riding in the front truck. As always, walking the talk. The nation stopped breathing. That night, the streets of Ouagadougou glowed under dim, flickering lights. The marketplace had quieted, but the city never truly slept. In the presidential palace, however, no light flickered. Everything there was powered, pristine, and precise, except for one man who still wore the dust of his people on his boots. President Ibrahim Tarore sat alone in a plain room, far from the chandeliers of his predecessors. The laughter, the shove, the insults, they echoed not in his ears but in his heart. Not because they wounded his pride. No. Pride had long since been buried beneath the weight of responsibility. What hurt was how clearly those voices reflected the fears of a nation. His people did not trust him. Worse, many didn't even recognize him. He called a late-night meeting, not with ministers or foreign envoys, but with his personal team. Men and women who had fought beside him when no one else believed. He looked them in the eyes and asked a simple question: how do we lead a people who don't see us? Silence fell like ash. One of them, a former teacher turned aide, said softly, "Maybe they don't need to see a president, sir. Maybe they need to see themselves." That struck something deep. Tarore stood, his decision already forming. Then let them. Over the next week, whispers swept the city like dry wind before a storm. A group of youth in the slums received an anonymous donation for books and tools. A struggling widow found her hospital debts cleared by a nameless man in a jacket. Market vendors were paid twice their price by a stranger who refused change. No one knew where the help was coming from. Some said it was a foreign NGO. Others claimed it was a ghost from the revolution. But the truth walked on worn soles and didn't speak his name. Meanwhile, in government buildings, ministers grumbled. Why is the president missing official functions? Why hasn't he addressed the press? Why is he walking among commoners like some street preacher? But Traore heard none of it. He was too busy sitting on dirt floors, listening to grandmothers talk about lost sons. He was too busy helping a boy learn how to read under a tree where his school used to stand before rebels burned it down. He was too busy being a mirror, not a monarch. Then, one morning, he returned to that same cafe. This time, he wore no uniform, just a faded shirt and old sandals. The regulars were there, puffing away, still loud with their opinions. He sat at the same table, ordered the same tea. One of them looked over and frowned. "You look familiar," the man muttered. "You the one we kicked out?" The room paused, some recognizing the dusty jacket, others just squinting to remember. Another man leaned in, scoffing. He came back for more tea or to cry about Traore again. Before anyone could respond, a radio in the corner crackled to life. A breaking news bulletin. The announcer's voice was steady but tense. President Ibrahim Tarore made an unannounced visit to the southern provinces yesterday, providing aid to flood victims. Citizens described him as humble, walking among them in plain clothes and helping distribute supplies directly. A photo flashed on the tiny screen of an old TV in the cafe. It was grainy, but unmistakable, the same man sitting among them now, hauling sacks of rice on his shoulder, sweat pouring down his face. The room fell silent. The man who'd shoved him turned pale. Another knocked over his cup of tea. The cafe owner stared, mouth open. One of the elders whispered, "My God, it was him." President Traore stood slowly. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just quiet presence. "I came back," he said, "not for revenge. But so you'd see me again, not as a face on the wall, not as a name in the news, but as a man who listens." His voice carried no threat, just truth. The man who had insulted him stepped forward, trembling. I didn't know. I'm sorry, sir. We didn't mean to." Traore gently raised a hand. "I am not here to punish. I'm here because if a president cannot be disrespected without rage, then he was never serving the people, he was demanding worship." The words struck like thunder. No one moved. Later that day, the story spread like wildfire, not through press releases, but through people. A girl told her mother. A cab driver told his next fare. Soldiers whispered it in barracks. He came back. He forgave them. He walked like us. And something shifted. Not overnight, but deeply. Because for the first time in years, the people of Burkina Faso didn't just have a president. They saw a leader. Radio stations fell silent. The cafes that once mocked him went quiet. Markets closed early. Schools held moments of silence. Morning swept the country like a storm. And then the truth came out. He had died saving others, just like he lived. The child he protected survived. And with him, the story. He held me. Said it was going to be okay. He didn't run. He told us to stay low and covered me when the shooting started. Funeral plans were drawn. But something unexpected happened. The people, farmers, students, elders, miners, refused a state ceremony in a grand hall. They demanded to bury him in the very village where he first lifted bricks to rebuild a school. Thousands walked barefoot to be there. Foreign dignitaries were asked to come humbly or not at all. No red carpets. No marble. Just dust, truth, and tears to tea his grave. A woman who once called him just another uniform whispered, "We didn't know who you were until you left. But now, we'll never forget." Another man, tears streaming down his face, said, "He didn't die a president. He lived like a brother." Years later, children would be taught his story not in history books but around fire pits, in songs, in murals across bullet-scarred walls. His portrait, drawn not in oil but in soil, became a symbol. Not of power, but of purpose. And every time someone offered kindness, chose service over pride, or stood for the voiceless, someone would whisper, "That's what Traore would have done." Because he was never just a president, he was a mirror, and we finally saw ourselves in him.